Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Great to have you on board with us. Got a lot we want to get into today, so stick with us and strap yourself in for the ride. You know, we've often made the observation that in America we are going to have to choose between the homosexual agenda and liberty because we cannot have both. I've stressed this over and over again. In fact, that's probably going to be an inscription that's going to be on my tombstone because I have so endlessly repeated this because it's the truth. Every expanse, every advance of the homosexual agenda comes at the expense of religious liberty. Got another example here. This is from the UK, but this same kind of thing has already happened in the United States. We had a court case that was resolved here not just too long ago. A bed and breakfast owner in the United States turned down a homosexual couple that wanted to have a wedding reception at their bed and breakfast, and they sued them, and the thing was settled out of court, but they've closed that bed and breakfast down. I mean, one of the things that happened is that couple just shut that whole thing down. They're out of the bed and breakfast business altogether, just driven into it by the homosexual agenda. So we're going to have to choose between homosexuality and liberty. We've got to understand that. We've got to say that over and over again, that the homosexual agenda is the biggest threat to religious liberty in the United States. And we see an example of this over in the UK. A Christian bed and breakfast owner appeared in court yesterday after being sued by a homosexual couple. The case began after Suzanne Wilkinson refused to let Michael Black and John Morgan share a double room at her bed and breakfast in 2010. Now, this is her establishment. It's private property. It's a private business. She does have the moral right and ought to have the legal right to run her business as she sees fit according to her most deeply held values. And she says, look, my faith is not restricted to Sundays. It affects every area of my day-to-day life. The values that I believe, I don't just believe them on Sunday. I believe them Monday through Saturday, and I live them out Monday through Saturday. That, ladies and gentlemen, is religious liberty. That's what the founders were trying to protect when they talked about protecting the free exercise of religion. Now, Barack Obama wants you to think that all that's about is protecting the freedom of worship. As if Barack Obama believes that, well, the Constitution gives you 1 hour a week, 11 to noon, that's yours to do whatever you want. But when it comes to religious liberty, the other 167 hours a week, they belong to me. Because as long as you're not involved in worship, I'll protect your freedom of worship. You can do whatever you want. You can sing whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. You can preach whatever you want. You can believe whatever you want inside the four walls of your church building on Sunday morning from 11 to noon. The other 167 hours, I will tell you what religious liberties you do and do not have. But the founders were not protecting freedom of worship. That's included, but they were protecting the free exercise of religion. Now, when this case first hit, according to the story in the Christian Institute or Christian Post from the UK, after the case first made the news, she and her husband were inundated with hate mail. Now, ladies and gentlemen, they say that we're the haters. And I will be the first to admit that there is hate in this debate. There is hate in the dialogue, but it is coming from the homosexual lobby, and it's directed to us. We don't hate anyone. We don't hate anybody. We just have a disagreement with people in the homosexual lobby about whether homosexual behavior ought to be sanctioned and endorsed and promoted and subsidized and get special protections in law and society. It's just a disagreement over public policy, and it's rooted in morality. It's just a different view of sexual morality. That's all it is. There's no hate involved in this debate at all. We're the ones that are willing to acknowledge, look, we've got a difference of opinion here. We believe that these are issues that ought to be settled by our elected representatives, and each of us ought to be able to make our case and then live by the decisions our elected representatives make. But that's not the way the homosexual lobby deals with it. In fact, I've got a story we're going to have to follow up on. But from Chicago, remember an alderman there said, I'm not going to let Chick-fil-A build a store in my ward. I'm going to stop it. And this back when the whole Chick-fil-A thing was heating up. Well, now he's come out today, according to Chicago Tribune, he's saying, I'm fine with Chick-fil-A building a store in my ward because they have promised me, headquarters has promised me that Chick-fil-A is not going to give any more money to organizations that promote marriage and the family. Now, we don't know if that's true. According to the Chicago Tribune, they tried to get confirmation. Chick-fil-A didn't respond either to confirm that report or to deny it. So we've just got to wait till we get more information. But clearly there was an effort on the part of mayors in 4 large cities in America to intimidate Chick-fil-A into going along with giving full sanction and endorsement to homosexual behavior. And here's what happened to this bed and breakfast owner in the UK, just inundated with hate mail, the story says, including a hand-delivered note threatening to torch their house. So somebody shows up. Obviously, they know where they live. They put a handwritten note on the front door, the front doorstep or wherever, saying, we're going to burn this place to the ground. And the case was heard yesterday at Reading County Court. All we ever wanted was to be able to live and work in keeping with our faith. And the homosexual lobby said, not on our watch. You do not have any religious liberty as long as we have anything to say about it. So we'll see what happens with that court case. And she said, look, it's not the sexual orientation that I objected to. It is the sexual behavior, because she doesn't just refuse to rent intimate quarters to homosexuals if they are not married or in a civil partnership. She won't allow them to share a double bed. She's not going to do it. So she's not singling out homosexuals here. This is about sexual behavior. And she said, look, I would have been happy to give them 2 single beds, but I didn't have any that were available. So we'll see how all of that turns out. In fact, I think she says it's not enough for them to be in a civil partnership. If they aren't married, husband and wife, then she's not going to rent a double bed to them. So we'll see how all of that plays out. But again, just the mere fact that she's been dragged into court probably tells you all that you need to know about what's going on over there and who's got the upper hand. Just the simple fact that you would get dragged into court over something like that probably tells us all that we need to know. Now, also on the homosexual lobby front, the city of Berkeley, California, they are going to hold the first annual Bisexual Pride Day. Now, we've been dealing with Gay Pride Days here in America. We're boycotting Home Depot because they celebrate Gay Pride Month and they get involved in these Gay Pride parades. Now, for the very first time, there's a city, Berkeley, California, that is going to host a Bisexual Pride Day. And then you start wondering, well, what comes next? Is there going to be a transgender Pride Day? Will there be an incest Pride Day? Will there be a pedophilia Pride Day? Will there be a bestiality Pride Day? What's coming? Because as we've said, look, once you cross the threshold of one man, one woman, there is no place to stop. There is no place to stop. Once you decide to treat homosexual behavior, which is sexually aberrant behavior, once you decide to treat it as normal and as a normal alternative to heterosexual behavior, there simply is no place to stop. And here's another example. This is from Massachusetts. Now, this is a guy that killed his wife in Massachusetts. He's in prison for killing his wife. Now, he has subsequently decided that he is a woman trapped inside a man's body. He was born Robert Koselleck, so that's what I'm going to refer to him because that's who he is. He's a male. That's his given name. He's not a female, even though he may think he is. This makes him sexually confused, mentally disturbed, mentally disordered, and mentally confused. That's still a mental disorder, according to the American Psychiatric Union. So he's in prison. Let's see. I don't know. He's serving a life sentence for strangling his wife in 1990. But since then, he's decided to go through this sex change procedure. He's been taking hormone treatments. He's changed his name. He wants to now be known as Michelle Lynn, but he's not a female. He's going to be a male in every single cell of his body until the day he dies. And we believe at the American Family Association that our public policy when it comes to gender and family ought to be rooted in biology. It ought to be rooted in science. It ought to be rooted in genetics. We're the ones that are taking our stand on the best that we know about genetics, about biology, about DNA. We're the ones that are standing on science. It's the left that wants to ignore that, say that doesn't matter. We're not about science. We're about an agenda. And forget the science. If the science gets in the way of our agenda, we are going to trample on science. And we in the pro-family community, we're the ones who are defending science here. But he says, look, the taxpayers not only need to pay for my hormone treatments, but they need to pay for a sex change operation. Well, let's see. Let's see if there's an operation involved in this. Maybe I'm misreading it. Entitled to have the sex change foot the bill for the legal battle. Maybe it's just a hormone treatment. It doesn't say anything in here about actually having an operation. It was $20,000 to $30,000, but he wants the taxpayers to pay for his hormone treatment so he can develop female appearing breasts. That's what he wants. That's how sexually confused he is. And he went to court, said, look, he had to go to court to get this done. And he went back to court and said, not only should the state, the taxpayers, have to pay for my hormone treatment, the taxpayers also ought to pay for the legal expenses that I had to incur in order to get the taxpayers to pay for my hormone treatment. And a judge agreed with them, said, yep, taxpayers, you're on the hook for his legal expenses as well as for the hormone treatment. Now, you may be familiar with Rupert Everett. He is a well-known actor. He's a homosexual actor, well-known gay actor, been out for a number of years. And he said a pretty amazing thing the other day. He said, quote, I can't think of anything worse than being brought up by two gay dads. This was a guy that was in my best friend's wedding. He was in Shakespeare in Love. You'd probably recognize him if you saw him. And he said, I've introduced my boyfriend to my mom, but she still wishes I had a wife and kids. That's what my mom wants for me. And who doesn't? What parent does not want that for their children? You want your children to be married. You want them to be happily married. You want them to be married to someone with whom they can have children. You want them to have children. That's what you want. That's what every parent wants. That's the American dream. And his mother still wants that for him. And here's what he said. She thinks children need a father and a mother, and I agree with her. I can't think of anything worse than being brought up by two gay dads. Now, there's a guy from a gay rights group that said, look, he should get out a bit more and see the facts, and says there is absolutely no evidence that the kids of gay parents suffer in the way they are being brought up or in how they develop. And we've been over this. He's saying, look, there's no evidence that kids suffer in gay households. We've talked about that. The studies that Mark Regnerus did, University of Texas, he talked to adults that had been raised in same-sex households, compared them with kids that had been raised in intact biological households raised by a mom and a dad, examined 80 outcomes. Kids raised in the same-sex households did worse on 77 out of the 80 outcomes. And the University of Texas said, we have no problem with his methodology. They signed off on his research. Focal Point AFR Talk, back in 2.